Hello everyone, welcome back for part 2 of the Bethany Deaton case. Thank you for joining me again. I had to get up off the floor. I love the lighting over there, but my knees were killing me, so that's why the scene change happened. Also, I cut curtain bangs last night, so if my hair looks different, that's why. Yeah. But just a quick recap, if you don't remember from last time, Bethany Deaton was a girl who went to Southwestern University and joined a Christian group that turned into a cult. Basically, the leader was Tyler Deaton, and they got married, and that is where we left off. So after their wedding, Tyler and Bethany went on a 3-week honeymoon to Costa Rica. And after they got back, their friends in the group were expecting them to be like closer than ever. I mean, what couple wouldn't be? But that wasn't the case at all. They still seemed to be kind of like uncomfortable with each other. They were even described as more like brother and sister than husband and wife. They just weren't acting like newlyweds at all, basically. And Bethany did move into the men's house with Tyler, but she would often go back to the women's house and stay the night, sometimes even multiple nights in a row, because she said she just needed a little space or she was feeling too controlled. And she was even more depressed at this time. She just wasn't happy at all. And of course, Tyler did not see this as his fault. He was basically like, that's your problem. I'm not dealing with it. He said that he did all he could to show her that God loved her, but it wasn't enough. And so he just kind of started ignoring it and told the rest of the group members to start ignoring it as well. And of course, Bethany didn't blame him either. She still saw him as this great leader, and now he was her husband. And so she kept it all inside. She was like that. She kept everything inside. She didn't blame anything on anyone else. She didn't really talk about her problems a lot. So everything was just kind of like building up inside of her, and she had no one to talk to. And because Tyler told everyone to kind of ignore her, it only isolated her further. And as you probably guessed, she wasn't talking to her friends and family either. So they also had no idea what was going on with her. And at this time, she probably just felt so alone and sad. And looking back now, we can clearly see she needed help, but she just wasn't getting what she needed. Also during this time, after Bethany and Tyler got married, Tyler was allegedly pursuing 3 different sexual relationships with the other men in the house. Bethany's depression continued to get worse and worse nearing the end of 2012. And October 23rd, she brought a cup of windshield wiper fluid over to the men's house and threatened suicide. And apparently her intent going over there was to confront Tyler about their relationship. He took the cup away from her and called the police. And when the police got there, they asked her if she was having suicidal thoughts. And she responded with, "It would be easier to die than change." So after this, she was taken into protective custody at Truman Medical Center in Kansas City. And while she was there, she would say things like that she was damned and could not achieve salvation, and that a reckoning was awaiting her. Now, despite all this, she was released 2 days later on October 25th. And as you can probably imagine, things did not get better for her. She, of course, went back to the community, and since she was so depressed, she wasn't able to complete all of her chores, understandably considering the state of mind she was in. And because of this, she was accused of not pulling her weight in the house. And one night, Tyler was preaching about personal selfishness, which of course Bethany knew was about her. And this really affected her because he'd basically just scolded her in front of the whole group. And according to the other group members, this kind of sent her over the edge. It was the last straw for Bethany. October 30th, 2012 started off just like any other day for the community. While the members were doing their individual tasks, Bethany stopped by the women's house to drop some things off. She told the women she wasn't going to work that day, and when they asked where she was going, she said, "I don't know." Based on surveillance footage and use of her debit card, we know that she went to a Walmart and then a gas station convenience store that day. Later that night at 9:40 p.m., Detective Penny Cole of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office received a call about a body in a tan Ford Windstar parked at Picnic Shelter number 12. Bethany Deaton's body was found in the very back seat of her car. She had turned 27 2 weeks earlier. She was described as, quote, sitting in the back of the van on the right-hand side, kind of leaned up against the window. Next to her, they found 2 bottles of Tylenol PM. One was completely empty and one was unopened. A white plastic bag had been tied over her head as well. She was wearing black sweatpants, a light blue sweater, sneakers, and her wedding ring. There was a note on the center console that read, "My name is Bethany Deaton. I chose this evil thing. I did it because I wouldn't be a real person, and what is the point of living if it is too late for that? I wish I had chosen differently a long time ago. I knew it all and refused to listen. Maybe Jesus will save me. So obviously right off the bat, this looks like a suicide, or at least it was made to look like one. But for Detective Cole, there were a couple red flags at the scene that made her question if it was a suicide or if it was foul play. For example, they found unfinished wedding notes in her car, and they were like, why would this newlywed who hasn't even finished writing her wedding thank you notes commit suicide? And then when she told Tyler that his wife had died, she only got more suspicious because of his reaction.
When I spoke with Tyler, I did not see the reaction that I expected from a newlywed at all, and it kind of made the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
That night, the community got together for a prayer service led by Micah, but there was something kind of off about him. He seemed almost relieved, and Tyler himself told the group to, quote, stay upbeat and press into the Lord, but this community is bigger than one person. And the next day at another meeting, Tyler said, quote, as some of you know already, I am a man who is in love with idea and crazy paradigms, and when they brought me Bethany's body, at first I cried. But then I laughed because I said to her, Bethany, if you could see you, you would not like the way you look right now. And last night we had worship time together very briefly as a group, and it was wonderful, and it just showed me the Lord's supremacy over this wretched thing that is death. And I thought to myself, what a crazy paradigm. And then I thought, Bethany would love my paradigm because she loved me and was so fiercely supportive and believed me hundreds of times when I thought I was crazy or heretical. Bethany's funeral was held at a funeral home overlooking Longview Lake, the place where her body was found. And much like her wedding, the people who attended it described it as kind of odd. One of the group members said, quote, there was a weird feeling that something was wrong, that something was just off, and it all goes back to the fact that Tyler wasn't moved at all. The day after the funeral, IHOP leaders informed Tyler that he was not allowed back on church property, and this included the houses that they lived in, because they had attended her funeral and were alarmed at Tyler's behavior as well. On November 8th, Bethany's death was ruled a suicide by the medical examiner's office, and the cause was asphyxiation. But the very next day, something happened that nobody was expecting. Micah Moore walked into the Grandview Police Department on the morning of November 9th and confessed to murdering Bethany Deaton. He claimed that Tyler told him to do it. According to him, she drank water laced with Seroquel. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it is an antipsychotic medication. And then after that, he killed her by putting the plastic bag over her head and keeping it there until her body shook. Colonel Ben Kenny had this to say about Micah's confession. Quote, when talking to Micah, he was very reluctant to speak. It was like he was trying to think of what to say or getting approval to say from someone. What he had confessed to fell back into place with the bag, the condition of Bethany's eyes, the grasping for air being either restricted or strangled around her throat. So Micah's confession, in a way, had made some things come together and make sense about the case. Her eyes had been open when she was found, and like I said, her cause of death was asphyxiation, not the fact that she had ingested a whole bottle of Tylenol PM. Colonel Kenny said, quote, she wasn't asleep, and most people when they overdose with some kind of sleeping medication, their body just starts to slow down and shuts down. So if she had overdosed, her eyes most likely would have been closed. But Micah's confession wasn't the only thing he told the police. He also said that Bethany had been drugged and sexually assaulted before by men in the house, and even that one of the sexual assaults was filmed on an iPad. According to Micah, Tyler was not involved in this, but he was most likely aware of it because he was aware of everything that went on in the community. Nothing slipped past him. And after this, the investigation into her death was understandably reopened. Shortly after this, IHOP released a statement basically saying that they had nothing to do with this, that they weren't affiliated with the community, that it was tragic, but they were not involved in any way. But a lot of people were still skeptical of IHOP. Some people thought they didn't do enough to prevent this and kind of keep Tyler and his cult in check. And I want to add this, I forgot to mention it earlier when I was talking about IHOP, but a lot of people do compare IHOP itself to a cult, and a lot of people think it is a cult. One woman who lived near IHOP and the community said, quote, IHOP has always kind of given me the creeps. They tend to attract people who are already naive. They think that everybody in the organization is just like them, but it's really easy if a wolf is there to just pull it apart. After Bethany's death, the community was kind of disbanding, and a lot of the ex-members started speaking up about what was really going on, specifically the sexual abuse from Tyler that I mentioned earlier. He would apparently describe sex as a religious experience and use that to manipulate the other men into having sexual relationships with him. Something else that came out that was really interesting is one of the members said that he told them that 3 days after Bethany's body was found, he had a dream that he suffocated her to death. So, as you can probably imagine, all of this is not making Tyler look very good. The way he reacted to her death, the dream he had, plus Micah saying in his confession that Tyler had told him to kill Bethany. It made a lot of people suspicious of him, and I can definitely see why. So with Bethany's death looking more and more like a murder, more things were coming into question. Like, for example, the note. Bethany was an excellent writer, so why was the note written so poorly? Like, for example, the line, "I did it because I wouldn't be a real person, and what is the point of living if it is too late for that?" It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And let me remind you, she'd been writing her whole life. She wanted to be a novelist. She got into school on a writing scholarship. So it just didn't really make sense. And her friends and family agreed with this. They did not think it was something she would write. And one of her friends said, "Someone who wrote so beautiful couldn't have written something that inarticulate." However, with the state of mind she was in, depressed, suicidal, it is entirely possible that maybe the words just weren't coming to her like they did before. But everyone was in agreement that the Bethany they knew and loved before all of this would never have written that. 2 weeks after Micah confessed, his lawyer recanted his statement on his behalf. She said that he was a confused and distraught young man, which does make sense based on what we know about him.
Micah Moore didn't say anything in court, but outside, his attorney revealed her client's changing story.
"We are aware of no evidence that a crime has occurred."
And it actually came out a while later that the day before Micah confessed, he actually went to IHOP and apparently got an exorcism there.
Driven to the police station by representatives of his church community, Micah told a fictional account that was bizarre, nonsensical, and most importantly, untrue.
Attorney Melanie Morgan says Moore's lie was sparked by the death of his friend, Bethany, and sudden removal of her husband, Tyler, as the leader of their religious group.
So when he did go to the police, he was kind of in this manic state, and after waking up later that day, he didn't even remember confessing. However, the recant was dismissed and they continued to investigate him. In November of 2012, he was indicted on first-degree murder charges, and in January 2013, he pleaded not guilty because the only thing tying him to Bethany's death was his confession. There was no evidence that he was actually there, and the confession was recanted. So, in October of 2014, before his trial even began, the charges against Micah were dropped. First of all, his timeline didn't add up. He said he killed her before 10 a.m., but her debit card was used after 10 a.m. And also he said he killed her in the front seat, but she was found in the back seat. And if you remember from earlier, he said she'd been drugged with Seroquel and sexually assaulted previously, but there was no Seroquel found in her system, and she was still a virgin at the time of her death, according to the autopsy. And because Micah said one of the sexual assaults was filmed on an iPad, of course all the technology was confiscated from the men's house, but the video wasn't found or evidence of it ever existing. So there was absolutely no way that Micah could be proven guilty without a reasonable doubt.
After nearly 2 years, Micah Moore now walks free.
We just hear relief. I mean, clearly he's thrilled. He's glad to have this cloud removed from him.
His attorney, Melanie Morgan, knew he was innocent from the beginning.
These were kids that lived in a community that were really, really good friends of his. And his statements, I think, hurt everybody.
The lead prosecutor on the case said, quote, "My office concluded that we could not ethically continue to pursue this case given the current evidence against Micah Moore. The duty of the prosecutor is to seek justice, not merely to convict." And I definitely agree with that. A lot of times you see someone innocent accused of a crime just because they want the case solved. And yes, Micah did confess, but there are so many false confessions for so many different reasons. And so you have to take that into account. And you may have seen this coming. Like I said, the only evidence tying him to Bethany's death was his confession, which he recanted. It was just not enough to convict him, especially with the state of mind he was in when he confessed.
Moore was diagnosed with a reactive psychotic disorder, usually triggered by a traumatic or stressful situation. Morgan thinks that's what led to his false confession.
And his lawyer actually claimed that he'd been manipulated by a subgroup of IHOP called Prisoners of Hope when he had his exorcism the day before he confessed. In his own words, "They are not prophets, they are manipulators." And she said that his confession was a reactive psychotic episode that was triggered by Bethany's death, who, if you remember, had been one of his very close friends, and also the realization that he was in a cult. But other than a few comments online, including that one I just said, he has not given any interviews or spoken out about this. He's been laying low and keeping quiet ever since all of this happened. But he has made it clear that he does regret his time in the community. And honestly, I do feel for him. I think he was very young and impressionable at the time, and just not in a good mental state, and in my opinion, he met the wrong people at the wrong time. Now you're probably thinking, where's Tyler in all of this? Did he get charged with anything?
In the course of 10 days, I lost Bethany first to death, which is worse than the other ones because it's so absolute. And then I lost all my friends. They like went from being really supportive to gone. And I lost the church that I was a part of, people I trusted in leadership. They were gone.
There were no charges against him, and after his cult disbanded, he moved back to Texas and got a job as a high school math teacher where he was doing well. But after students started Googling him and found out everything that happened in Kansas City, he was let go in April of 2013. And as for the rest of the members, they basically had to face the fact that they had been in a cult for years and they'd been lied to and manipulated by Tyler, someone who they trusted and had faith in. So they were finally free, but it was challenging readjusting to society and kind of putting the pieces of their lives back together. Tyler, on the other hand, did not keep quiet after this. Although he did live anonymously and avoid reporters, he participated in the CBS 48 Hours special on Bethany's death. I think he kind of did this in hopes to clear his name a little bit, but it did not have that effect. It did the opposite pretty much.
Bethany and I's relationship was definitely strained, but just because it was strained doesn't mean I was murderous.
Much like his behavior after Bethany's death, he was upbeat and positive, smiling and laughing about the situation and things that were very serious. And I'm sure I've inserted clips from this throughout the video. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. Just not at all like a grieving husband. He never was. I just want to add that I know everybody grieves differently and some people might not show it as much, and in no way am I saying that his behavior means he's guilty of anything. But I think the fact that pretty much everybody was kind of alarmed by his behavior after her death, including Bethany's friends and family and the detective on the case, I think that says a lot. And of course, he denies his involvement in Bethany's death and even being a cult leader.
You've been described as a cult leader.
Okay.
True?
I don't think so, no.
So if you remember from before, Bethany's death was ruled a suicide, but then after Micah confessed, it was changed to undetermined. Most of the evidence does seem to point to suicide, but Detective Cole continued to investigate anyway. She said, quote, "I think her life was taken by someone, and I can't say I have an opinion because I have to base what I do on evidence and facts, but what I have seen in my investigation leads me to believe that Bethany did not kill herself. I think Tyler had great influence over everyone in his community. I think he had an immense amount of influence in every aspect of their life. Someone knows more and they need to speak up and speak up for Bethany because she would have done that for them." However, many people do believe it was a suicide, including Bethany's own father. He said, quote, "In my particular understanding of the facts, as we've come to know them at this point, I believe Bethany was severely depressed to the point of being suicidal. And I believe that she wasn't properly cared for or protected in a very fragile state, and I think she took her own life." And I have to say, based on what I've read and researched about this case, I am leaning more towards suicide as well. I think, like her father said, she was severely depressed and unfortunately did not get the help she needed at the time. I think she just really felt alone and that the only way out was suicide, which it never is. But the fact that the detective on the case thinks that it wasn't suicide and that she was murdered makes me question that, because obviously the police know more about the case than we do. They never release all the details, and so I don't really know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, but like I said, please keep it respectful, but I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think happened. Either way, her death was a tragedy and should not be taken lightly. Her friends and family continue to remember her as the beautiful, intelligent, caring girl that they once knew, and they continue to share her story in hopes of keeping her memory alive and maybe helping other people who are in the same situation.
I don't want revenge and I don't want vengeance. I want justice and I want truth.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in for my first true crime video. I appreciate it so much. Let me know what you thought. And again, if you know this case and I left out anything important or I got something wrong, please let me know down below, or just let me know what you thought or whatever you want. And also, if you have any requests for cases for me to cover, please let me know. Preferably not like super well-known ones, but yeah, if there's one you really want to see and you haven't seen another YouTuber cover, or like not very many people have talked about it, definitely let me know. I will consider it. And again, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It would mean so much. There will be more to come. hopefully soon. These videos take forever though. Like, it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment for sure. I'll get used to it. But yeah, I will see you in my next video. Bye.